This program brought to you by ACS. Think ahead, create the future, change the world. This is Swipe on Your Money.
Hello, I'm James Daggar-Nickson and welcome to Swipe, the show designed to keep you up to date with all the latest and greatest trends and products in tech. Coming up.
Every company will be an AI company. Every company. We would have said 4 or 5 years ago, every company is a software company, but that's so yesterday. The way of looking forward is every company in one way or another will be using AI tools to communicate to their suppliers, their customers, their consumers in some fashion or another.
And we're going to hear from Microsoft's Global Chief Technology Officer for a better understanding of artificial intelligence and how it's set to impact our lives. Plus, we take you to the Swipe testing facility where this week we'll be reviewing the latest LG ultra-wide monitor, and trust me, it's a big one. But first, it is tech news time for that. I'm joined by Matt Dunn from the Daily Telegraph and the Australian's David Swan from our Melbourne studio. First up, you can't talk tech without starting with Tesla. It's announced their low-cost Model 3 will be coming to Australia with the right-hand drive version going into production next year. Now, the Model 3 can reach speeds of 200 kilometres per hour and the battery can last for 420 clicks. It will set you back, though. Keep in mind, this is meant to be the mass market vehicle. It's going to set you back about 77,000 grand here in Australia. So they've also announced an Alexandria facility as well as a mobile device app. Matt, are you a Tesla fan?
Yeah, I am. I like the concept. I like the idea. Obviously, as a journo, I think it's out of my price range, but you know, I would get on board if I could.
If you could. Well, this is it. The Model 3 is meant to be the game changer. Bring it to the masses. Bring it to the journalists.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that I like about it is not so much the electric, it's the autonomous side of it. So, you know, obviously that's a while off yet before that will take over. But for me, that is the future. I love the idea of hopping in a car, not having to drive and letting it do all the work for me. I guess it's lazy.
Is that just because you're lazy?
Yeah, well, kind of. And some people say that they, you know, oh, I want to drive and it'll be a shame if that ever happens, but I'm all for it.
Just ask, what will you do whilst you're sitting in the car and it's driving for you? How do you intend to pass your time? Because this is what fascinates me. The idea, though, it's going to be productivity. I'm going to be, knocking out stories whilst I'm driving a car. People are just going to be playing video games and watching Netflix.
Yeah, look, I'd like to say I'm going to be working, but it's probably all Spider-Man inside my car.
David Swan, what about you? As far as Teslas are concerned, has Elon Musk's somewhat erratic behaviour of last year has it taken any of the shine, do you think, as far as the Tesla fanboys are concerned?
I think somewhat it has. We've seen over the last few weeks, Elon has behaved incredibly erratically and he's not the chairman of the company anymore. That's a pretty big deal. I think we are starting to see some of the shine come off the company. The real question is, over the next couple of years, if he can keep delivering the cars. I mean, the proof will be in the pudding, really, to see if the cars can still come into production and we can start driving them. We'll see next year if they'll make it to Australia or not, but yeah. We'll see. Yeah,
the jury is out, isn't it? Because they are burning through monumental wads of cash every month and seemingly delay after delay in terms of those production targets.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. I mean, we've got all sorts of stories coming out as well of employees who say that things aren't particularly rosy over at Tesla. So hopefully, Elon can start focusing less on Twitter and more on actually putting the cars out.
I think that's good advice. Some people just need to get off socials, don't they, Matt?
Yeah.
He's that guy.
I'm all for Elon. I love the erratic behaviour. When he was on Rogan, you got to pay it.
As long as you're not a shareholder.
Yeah.
Imagine you're sitting there watching, your hard-earned dollar just get smoked away.
Quite literally.
Exactly. Let's move on. Amazon Australia has launched food and drinks category with thousands of items from over 400 local and international brands. The expansion comes less than a year after the launch of Amazon's Australian website, putting pressure on local retailers Woolworths and Coles. A big move. Before we get into the idea of pantry food, which is what this is all about, David, has Amazon, do you think, entry into Australia lived up to the hype?
It has not to date. They've obviously been very deliberate in taking a slow and steady approach and not try to launch everything at once. If you're in the US, for example, often you have same-day delivery. In Australia, they don't often offer that, and there are a lot of products that you still can't get in Australia that you can get elsewhere with Amazon. So they've been slow and steady, and I think that would have cost them some momentum that they would have otherwise had.
Does this bring them a step closer? We know that food delivery over in the US is a big deal for them, particularly as you say, if you're a Prime member, same-day delivery. Does this bring them a step closer to what people have been expecting, at least from Amazon?
I think so, and I think for the Matts of the world who might be a bit on the lazy side and want to be driven everywhere, for example, if you can now get your food delivery all to your house as well, so you get your car driving you places, and now your food, you don't even have to leave the house. So I think it will be quite popular, yeah.
You've been sweating on this one, haven't you, Matt? Too late.
No, I'm all for it. Bring it here. I think that it will pick up, but it's probably not something that my parents, like I sort of think of them, and they're just getting on board with Coles delivering things, you know what I mean? They think that's exciting. And I think for them, Amazon is still so foreign to them, and I think they know it as like the book place or somewhere where you can get tech, and to buy groceries off that, it's going to be a bit of a hard slog to convince people, especially because it hasn't lived up to the hype and hasn't had the uptake. I think that it's a great idea, and yeah, I'm sort of on board, as Dave said, bring it on. But yeah, for other people, I think it might be a little bit harder to convince, unless obviously savings were a lot more than you would get at the grocery store. All
right, so we've done Tesla, we've done Amazon. It's time for Apple now, because a new study by Citi has revealed that new iPhone models are no longer creating as much buzz as they used to. Interest in the phones has actually been on the slide since the iPhone 5 6 years ago. The study analysed web searches for the new iPhones each year, finding Apple's momentum has been gradually decreasing. Matt Dunn, have we potentially reached peak Apple? Peak iPhone.
As a Samsung fanboy, I'd love to say yes.
They're cheering in the background.
Yeah, but I think it's more the case of just how far can you sort of take a phone every year? You're sort of bringing something out, and the changes are only so small, and to do the major changes that people want, the cost is going to skyrocket, and the prices are already getting up there. I mean, if you're dropping $1,500 on a phone, the average punter doesn't really have that to spend a year.
Top spec, $2,000.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot. And I mean, if you buy it, what you get is pretty good value. It's basically a small computer, and they're amazing. But at the same time, I can see why people aren't rushing out year after year to buy a new one. It's sort of a cycle where you try and get the most out of it. And they're building them to be more durable now. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not surprised.
David, I couldn't help but notice the last few years, when it first started, you used to get the massive queues outside the Apple stores, in major cities. That in itself became a news story. That has disappeared. The queues aren't there. I don't know if people have just woken up to online pre-ordering, or if that's a resemblance or a reflection, if you like, of somewhat of a waning enthusiasm for all things Apple.
I think it's the latter. And on a personal note, I used to kind of be the cool kid, at school I'd have the latest iPhone, and that came with some cachet, it came with some sort of status, and that status just isn't there anymore, and that's just kind of across the board. I think it is broader than an Apple thing. I think it does, include Samsung and other phone companies too. It's just hard to get people's attention these days with little updates, as Matt said, and the new iPhone's it's just not what it used to be.
No, particularly if I suppose the level of change or differentiation between models isn't that great, and yet you're still being asked to pay a lot of money to upgrade to something that is only marginally better.
Yeah, and I think Apple's made a smart move in introducing the 10R, the XR model, where it's a bit cheaper, and that's really where Apple can grow, is to actually get people who maybe couldn't afford an iPhone previously and bring them into the fold.
All right, guys, we're going to leave it there. Big thank you to my panel today. David Swan from The Australian, of course, Matt Dunn from the Daily Telegraph. Thanks very much, guys. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be hearing from the Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft for his take on the opportunities and the challenges facing AI. So stay with us.
Now, more Swipe on your money.
Welcome back. Well, NAB has partnered with Microsoft to design an ATM packed with all the latest in artificial intelligence as well as cloud computing technologies. The newly designed ATM removes the need for cards, instead using facial recognition and a PIN to withdraw cash. Well, for more on the opportunities and the challenges that AI can bring to business, I spoke to Norman Judah, the Global CTO of Digital at Microsoft. Norman Judah, really excited to have you here. Thanks so much for your time today. Lots to talk about. We're going to focus in on artificial intelligence. AI, it's certainly been a buzzword for a number of years now. Most people, though, probably have experienced it through a smart speaker. You know, there are plenty on the market these days. But from your perspective, as the CTO of Microsoft, how do you view AI and the potential of AI?
I think you have to go not necessarily from the individual as you've described, but go higher up. And the way we think about it is AI is about augmenting human ingenuity, about amplifying human ingenuity. It's making people better or making the systems that they use better. I can go from there, and then I can come down to various ways that you interact with systems, with people, whether you're at a corporate level or whether you're a consumer at home trying to achieve some function.
And is it something that, and let's start and go at the top and go down, is it something then that is going to be applicable across industry? I mean, there might be some industries you think, oh, I can't see how, you know, a smart machine, for example, is going to impact what I do, you know, selling my widgets or whatever. Is that naive?
It's not necessarily naive, but it's incomplete, which was, I think the other way of looking at it is that every company will be an AI company. Every company. We would have said 4 or 5 years ago, every company is a software company, but that's so yesterday. The way of looking forward is every company in one way or another will be using AI tools to communicate to their suppliers, their customers, their consumers in some fashion or another. You experience AI on your phone every day in various ways, through voice, through text, through spell checking. You interface with it. You just don't know because it's been seamlessly integrated into the experience that it's there. So there's a simple way you can do that. But there's other things that we can do. For example, something that we're announcing this week with NAB is when you walk up to an ATM today, instead of having to shuffle through your pockets and find a card and remember your PIN, you just walk up and it'll recognize you. So your experience at that ATM about walking up and actually walking away with $100 and being safe and secure and reliable based on facial recognition and a PIN, that's a way that AI will start to change your life, to change the way you live, to change the way you interact, not only yourself and systems, but yourself with people.
Financial services, it seems to be an area that has a lot of focus in regards to artificial intelligence. You made mention of the NAB. I know you're doing a lot of other things as well, which we might get to. But it brings us into the area of privacy and security. The latter in particular, when you're talking about being able to walk up to an ATM, how good are we at protecting it? How good are we on the security side, if you like, when it comes to, yes, we can do this, but do we have the security that suggests that we should be doing it?
So again, let's separate security and privacy, because I think those are two discrete issues. Let's stick with the security aspects for a moment. So one on facial recognition, there's a question of how good is it, and it's as good as you've trained it to be. So let me back up a little bit and tell you the way AI works. Essentially, the way a machine learning system works has an engine that's a neural network that looks like your brain. But then you build a model, and that model is the way you configure the business, in this case, facial recognition. You train that model on data. Now, because people have been involved, some person has actually built the model and some person has curated the data. If you start off with the assumption that unconscious bias is inherent with everybody, which it is, if that's true, then your model is probably biased and your data is probably biased. So if you're aware of that when you go in, you can actually now build accordingly. And you can make sure that when I'm training the model for facial recognition, that I train it for men and women equally, of different ages, of different skin tones, of different ethnic backgrounds. If you're conscious of doing that level of training of the system and teaching it how it learns, because these systems learn, not only the first time, but every time you use it, it learns. So if you can train the system with great data, you'll get great AI. But the flip side of that is also true. If your data is biased or your data is constrained in some fashion, you might land up with the wrong answer. So the security perspective, if the model is trained well and actually is well understood of the problem set it's trying to solve, it actually is quite easy and very secure.
You've touched on a sort of a bigger almost ethical issue around AI, and that is the fact that at its beginning there is that human element, which naturally, as you say, brings in a form of bias. So can you, and you sort of semi-answered it, can you have purely objective then artificial intelligence when at its genesis someone is making a call? There is a human element to it.
So you go back to our definition, augmenting human ingenuity. We believe that, at least at the point that we're at today, these systems have to be open loop in the sense that there's a human in the middle casting judgment. As soon as you go to closed loop and automate it, some programmer has written a piece of code that says if this, then that, and actually has made a decision for me. So the notion of human judgment is super important to actually get into the middle, because the AI systems make a recommendation, and then somebody's making a judgment as to whether this is valid or whether this is not valid. But I want to go to one other thing, which was an AI model. When you train it, imagine you've got young kids, and every night to them you take out a new book and you read to them. And what's happening is you're training their brain on this content. You read a book, and after a while you think they're reading the book with you, but they actually know it by heart. They're not reading it, they're just coming back road. Then you get another book and you start to train them again. Machine learning operates the same way, which is you train the system initially. It's well trained and structured and perfectly unbiased. Imagine that. But then as you start to use it, it can start to decay and get what's called model drift, which is the model starts to drift because every time you ask that model a question, you're actually giving it more data. And if the incremental data that you give it is biased, you might have started off as pristine, but over time you'll sort of start to drift as a consequence of that. So it's not actually a one-time deal. There's the care and feeding of AI systems is actually an important task. There's a skill set and a structured set of governance and procedures about monitoring and maintaining an AI system.
But where's it going? I mean, we're talking about these things having personalities and the interaction, and you can almost argue at some level they become brand ambassadors for the companies. So where is this going from a company perspective, but also interestingly, you and I might be the target of the company. So where's it going for us? Where's it going for the consumer as well, beyond the consumables?
Right.
But how is our world going to be impacted by the fast adoption that those companies are actually taking with this?
So there are a couple of interesting pieces on that. One is the demographic of age groups and how they interact with them, which is very different. The millennials, just natural, it's the way they work. If you're a little
I've got a 2-year-old who naturally swipes, things like that, and talks to Google at home.
The question is, will she or he ever learn how to write in script? That's actually the real question. Will they ever do that? Actually, let me just riff on something for a second. I got this really interesting question the other day, which is something you need to ponder for your child now. Given what is happening, what should these children, high school kids today, learn so that when they're in the workforce in 10 years' time, operating in the environment you're describing, they're actually living in this AI world where they're being fed this information, massive amounts of data. What's the skill set to do that?
So it is a difficult one. I mean, they do computing when she gets a little bit old, but the same question I posed myself from my schooling is when I was about heading into to high school just beforehand in the pre-high school years, I was learning Latin. This is a dead language. Yes, there's some basis for a whole other languages, but what use into the jobs or the future was Latin going to sort of be? Should I have been learning a different language which was going to put me at a better use, if you like?
So I don't think it's actually it's a specific language, but language is important. So I'll tell you how I answered that question, because I got the question in India, talking to a reporter there. So there really, I think, are two elements of it. One is the necessity to understand data and information, because today, going onto the web, you actually are judging the value of what you're seeing. Am I being fed real data? Is this fake data? What is the value of the information that I'm finding? Every day you're actually making decisions. So it's going to become even more important, because that data could be used to bias a model for an AI system, for you to actually still have judgment. So the basic understanding of information and how to deal with it will be a core skill, I think. There's another one which is orthogonal to it, which is even more interesting, which is if you can understand it, can you be articulate and describe in a simple way what you're seeing? So it's this scientific and then an orthogonal axis of storytelling. So back to your language thing. I actually don't care what language you learn, but can you actually describe simply the synthesis of what you're seeing? I think those are the two skills that are going to drive people crazy going forward.
Norman, Judah, I could go all day. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to. We have to leave it there. An absolute pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, a look inside the swipe testing facility. Plus, we go live to Sydney to speak to the winner of Dell's PolicyHack. Stay with us.
We'll be back with more Swipe on Your Money. And now, more Swipe on Your Money.
Welcome back. Following the launch of the DWEN Sydney Blueprint in July this year, Dell invited teams of students, entrepreneurs and government policymakers to tackle the challenges that female entrepreneurs in Australia face in a free, interactive hackathon. It is the first time that the Dell PolicyHack has taken place in Australia. Well, the hackathon happened in Sydney earlier this evening with the winners announced just a few moments ago. Well, I'm pleased to say we're now joined live by Mariam Mohammed from the winning group, the Capitalists. Mariam, firstly, congratulations. Did you expect to take out the big prize?
Thank you. Thank you, James. No, we did not. As you might guess by our name, we totally did not expect to win. It was a nice little gag, but it's a pleasant surprise.
What's the hack? What won?
All right, so the problem we were seeking to resolve is that women entrepreneurs in Sydney have barriers in place to access funding for their startups, for their enterprises. So the solution that won was having an anonymized system of pitching so that everyone is pitching at an equal level. And it removes the unconscious bias that women often experience. So we know for a fact that women in Australia start twice as many tech startups, for example. But fail at exorbitantly higher rates. And so it addresses the unconscious bias that the investors have. The second side of the solution was incentivizing private businesses to actually fund women startups. And for that, the proposed incentive was that if businesses are able to fund X% women startups, then they will get a financial incentive in the form of a tax rebate or a grant, which they can only access if they reach that benchmark. So it addresses two things: incentive for private enterprise to actually fund women founders, and two, the unconscious bias that investors have towards women entrepreneurs.
Fantastic. Now, what happens next? So it's a wonderful initiative. So is there support? Does Dell kind of kick in and say, let's make this a reality? Do you know what happens from here now that you're the winner?
So no, I don't. But the feedback that we received was that, well, it's a very raw idea, but with more research, it has the potential to actually provide real life incentives for businesses to invest in women entrepreneurs. And that's the whole idea.
And from your perspective, Mariam, how real is the issue? You know, talking about, actually making it so almost a blind audition for people looking for funding. I mean, how real is the glass ceiling, if you like, for lack of a better term, when it comes to female entrepreneurs here in Australia?
So we know, for example, that only 2% of women who pitch to VCs are able to secure funding, even though women are pitching just as much or higher than their male counterparts. And we know from research that already exists that venture capitalists, the executives are mostly men, and they tend to favor things that they have seen before, behaviors that they identify with, and that is normally not women founders and women entrepreneurs. So the research for this already exists, and that makes the implementation of this solution even easier, because step one's already done. We know what the problem is. We know how bad the problem is. We know the statistics, so we can actually just jump straight to addressing them.
Fantastic win tonight, Mariam. Congratulations, and thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me.
And I have to say, fantastic initiative from Dell as well. Well, that is it for Swipe for this week. You can watch us anytime on 9 Now, Foxtel Go, and on the catch-up section of yourmoney.com.au. There's no excuse really not to watch. I'm James Daggar-Nickson. Have a good night.
This program brought to you by ACS. Think ahead, create the future, change the world.